Hey, it's Joe West from the West Barn with
Mike Shimshack.
Today we got Jim Moose Brown on. Congratulations, people. You're in for a good treat. Jim Moose Brown is a studio musician, a record producer, and a songwriter based out of Nashville. He's also in the Silver Bullet Band. Any Bob Seger fans out there? A Grammy Award-winning songwriter, a Grammy-nominated record producer. He's written songs that will continue to pay for his kids' college. One of those being It's 5 O'Clock Somewhere. That was one that earned a little bit of jing.
Little song.
He's also a session musician. Reba McEntire, Aaron Lewis, Colt Ford, Willie Nelson, Montgomery Gentry, Kid Rock, Trace Adkins, tons and tons of big records, new and old. He is a staple here in Nashville, and we're glad to have him on. Welcome.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
He made the trip in from Goodlettsville today. I was just telling him that we got our little puppy here. Maxine came from Goodlettsville, so we were wrapping up with Gordon Mote. Our times kind of went over, and I was saying that my dog is like got a ton of attack in her until the point and/or moment that you open the door, and then it's a complete waste of energy.
That's the kind of dog you want.
Yeah,
keep them outside.
We had somebody on the property the other night. We've got a chunk of property here, and I went out with a shotgun that has like one of these really bright lights on the end, and walking on the driveway to see who's down in this bottom field of mine, and I got my dog. I thought I had my dog at my shank, right at my rear coverage.
Well trained.
I get down to the end there, and I'm shining my light, and I'm like, go down there. I turn around, and she had made a beeline up to the door. My wife said she was standing at the door going, please let me in, please let me in. So, sorry, it was not a good showing for Goodlettsville. But before we get started here, remember to subscribe and hit notifications wherever you're listening, and share with a friend. One of the greatest things, I've been hearing about you forever. I played in a songwriter festival with you, the Sandy Lee thing up in Kentucky.
Yeah.
You and I played in a round. This is years ago, and I just remember kind of being baffled by your sheer level of talent and performance. And so I just knew that you were one of those guys that was, if you were going to show up for a day to write with Jim Moose Brown, I would make sure that I was well prepared. I'd be on my toes, because you're a real talent. So
well, I appreciate that.
Good testament.
I do remember that. I love that festival up there. It's a good time.
I haven't done it the last couple of years.
I haven't either. But
it was funny. I remember they would hire this PA company to come in, and they ran 3 venues, and they would bring in more gear. It was like an arena level production, and it was always the worst sound ever. At one point, I was in a round with Jason Matthews, and he went, I got one knob on this guitar. One knob. So it brought a certain level of anxiety to the
like
sound
to do a
guy.
song that
It was, but it was a good hang up there. They always sort of set you on little, you got, into things, and
It's a great crowd. People love songwriters up there, and you know what? I found over the last few years,
they push us a little closer to you.
I found over the last few years they do everywhere, man. It's I do these songwriters things not that often, but that's a really cool market. I mean, people love to hear the story behind the song.
Yeah. Well, in Nashville here, people, you're just throw a rock. There's a songwriter. There's a songwriter show every night, every place with an acoustic guitar. But when they put you on an airplane and they take you out to Zilla, Washington, and you play for these people, and they get to hear these songs they know, like, hey, this is the dude that wrote 5 O'Clock Somewhere. This is how he wrote it. This is the whole story behind it. And then he's going to play it intimately with an acoustic guitar. People are not prepared for that when they have that level of story and song.
Sometimes
together.
I actually see the light bulb come on where they're like halfway through the show, they're like, oh, I get it. He wrote these things because, they just, songwriters don't really live and make a living out there.
It's very unique to Nashville.
Yes,
it really is.
It really is.
You don't see it anywhere else.
And the level of songwriting.
Correct.
To me, the best songwriters in the world are here.
100%.
Yep. That's true. You get into the room sometimes as a young songwriter, you think you can do your thing, and then they throw you into the co-write world, and I don't know where you came from. Like for me, I was writing with artists and by myself or with a couple friends that were like, we were finishing records in New York or wherever we were making records. And then you realize that you got to do it at 10 a.m. with someone you didn't meet. And then it's like, oh, how do you find the idea? And how do you get to the point where it makes sense? And what's my point? What is my part? Like, there's this whole bump and uglies that happens for months, maybe for years as a young songwriter. And then you'll get into a room with a guy like you, and then you'll be like, this is a real craft. There's inspiration and there's craft. Sometimes they coalesce, but get in a room with a guy that really knows how to get to an idea in a song.
Well, I'd like to think I know how to do that, but I'm not the strongest lyricist in town. My role changes with every writing appointment. I mean, if I'm sitting in a room with Dean Dillon, more than anything, I steer him. You know, there are times that I carry the ball lyrically, but my favorite songs are the ones when I'm thrown in a room with a real craftsman.
That's a great point. It's like finding people. I've written songs with guys that are insanely talented, but it's just we're not a good fit.
Yeah, me too.
We're not. We shouldn't be doing this together. And it makes sense on paper, but not in the room.
And I don't know why. I don't know why that is. It's very rare that I find somebody that I don't click with. I've been in a room with Chris Dubois, who was my publisher for 16 years. One of the greatest songwriters, biggest hit songwriters, hit after hit after hit. I don't know how many number ones he's written, and I think we've only gotten like 2 songs through the years. Yeah. Casey Beathard is another one. He's one of my best friends. And I think we've gotten together probably a dozen times and maybe written 1 or 2 songs.
And then there's times you'll get with someone that's a total amateur. Someone won a contest and they're writing with you. Or it's a brand new baby artist. Or someone that doesn't, maybe is here for a long time, but literally didn't put one part into a song. Not a melody, not a lyric, but it was like, they're a muse, you know? And it's
usually my best writing appointments are with somebody that I don't know. I don't know why that is.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, usually my first write with somebody, maybe it's because we're both on the edge of our seat a little bit. But yeah.
I feel like I can be more honest with complete strangers.
Maybe. Could be that too.
I can't tell you how many times I've wanted to say, oh, I'm going to remember this exact moment from the co-write, and I'm going to tell my wife what I just said about her. Because it was a really nice sentiment that was like...
Hopefully it's a good song, a
nice
nice song.
Yeah, I don't tell her the bad ones. I don't have any bad ones, by the way. But like whenever I do, it's like I'll find that it's like a couch moment, you know, a therapist, and you're like, oh, I'm going to make sure, I'm going to tell her this. It never comes across later.
Yeah.
But that being said, there's a freedom in like not knowing someone and being able to say like, yeah, I'm really having a problem with my son, or I'm struggling with this, and I'm more free to tell a stranger that maybe than a good friend.
I have had that happen a time or two. The first time I ever wrote with Kelly Lovelace, years and years ago, I was going through a struggle in my marriage, and I just opened up to him, and we wrote one of the best songs I've ever written. And I don't know that we ever had that honest moment again. I mean, it was a 3 minutes of pure honest pain.
Right.
And but yeah, sometimes you're right. Sometimes you do open up to somebody you don't really know that well.
Yeah, and how many of those songs do you have in your catalog? Like you've got a long legacy of hits. How many songs are there in there that are just like, I really wish this song had made it, that didn't?
I've probably got a half dozen or so. And but you know what? That's the thing about a song is you just never know when. The timing's. I read somewhere that the average time span from the time a song is written till the time it is recorded is about 7 years.
I just read that on Facebook today.
Yeah, and I've had songs that have hung around for 7 to 10 years. The kind of stuff I write is not probably what's on the radio right now, so maybe it'll come back around. You know, we go in cycles. I'm a little bit older school, I think, in my writing, and but I think we're coming back to that. And I listen to the radio now, and I hear a song where 5 years ago I really didn't hear many songs where I go, wow, that moved me to my core. Every now and then I'll hear a song, so I think it's coming back around. You know?
Regardless, I think, of where the music business is, there's always one song a year that all songwriters. We just had James Otto on, and he played in Keller and sang, and it wasn't just the voice, it was the song, and it was like, that's one of those songs, like The House That Built Me, or I Can't Make You Love Me If You Don't, that you'll get all songwriters saying, raise their hand, I wish I had written that one.
Absolutely.
So I do like the country music when people complain about it, and I'm not saying you are, but whenever I feel myself wanting to complain about it, I'll be like, oh, okay, but it's still the one genre that you can occasionally. You're going to get a guaranteed 1 or 2 songs a year, if you're lucky, that you're like, I want to do more of that. This is why I got into the business. And it's, it's hope for those old songs. I had a song that was 10 years old that got cut by Tim McGraw, and it's like, well, isn't that interesting? When I first came to town, I had sat in on we had gotten tickets to the Bluebird, my wife and I. And who was it? It was, I wish I could remember his name. Peterson, Michael Peterson?
Yeah.
He had a number 1 with a song, and he's playing in this round. And before he
What a
So
nice guy. Yeah, I haven't
he
seen him in
seemed
years.
really great.
Nice guy. Yeah.
He's sitting there and he has his back to us, and in the Bluebird, you're right up on. You're like you would be here if you were an audience member. And Michael Peterson, I'm right at his back, and he's telling this story, and I just moved to town, desperately wanting to find my groove. And he had said, I wrote this song when I worked at the BP, the Boron, up here in Green Hills 10 years ago. And he said, I didn't know it then, but I was a hit songwriter. And that always stayed with me because it became a hit song 5 years later, let's say. And eventually went to #1, and I thought, isn't that something? It's not that I need to continually be changing, to change who I am, to be a success. I need to find who I am, write those songs, and they may already be hits. They just haven't been cut yet.
You hit it on the head there, because when everything started changing and we started going down the back road tailgate thing, I tried my hand at that, and it didn't take me very long to realize that nobody wants to hear my version of that. I kind of suck at that. And
C+.
So I just kind of quit writing those, and I even had a period where I thought, well, maybe it's time for me to kind of ride off in the sunset. And it's not that I don't. I think the music coming out of Nashville is fine. They're not making those singles for me necessarily. They're making them for a younger audience, and but I think they're great. It's just I'm personally not as moved as I was at one time. So anyway, yeah. I mean,
can respect that. It's like maybe it's time for me to just chill out until it comes back around.
About 2 or 3 years ago, I really thought I was going to retire. And it's funny how God works in that way. In that when I made that decision, which was one of the weirdest hardest decisions I ever made, when I would get phone calls to play on records, that was that type of stuff. And the thing that gets me about the records now, and it's nobody's fault, it's just technology has evolved so much that we take the human element out of the records. You don't really capture live performances anymore. Back in the day, you had to capture live performances because you couldn't edit it. You couldn't fly the first chorus to the second chorus or whatever. And I just think that translates. When the second chorus comes around and the vocalist hears the band step up a notch, they step up a notch, and that all, it's like everybody's swaying together. And we don't do that anymore. When you build tracks and add layers,
it's not so weird that it's like, it's that someone snuck into your cornfield and planted pumpkins.
Yeah.
Because what I'm trying to get to here is like, it's not that any of these guys are angry. It's that people came into their sort of where they made their living and then changed the genre of that. You wouldn't dislike country music. Well, it evolves, and I guess from Kenny Rogers to Rascal Flatts was a big paradigm change, and it happens, and we all accept it. But it is a little bit more difficult to accept because it was a fertile field growing corn, and now it's growing something else. And it's like, you're maybe not the best corn, or not the best pumpkin, planter. So it's just it's the fact that it's some of the same real estate that makes me feel weird. And I feel like I've passed through a section where I was telling Mike, I was writing out on the porch with two younger, very, in their phones are blowing up all the time right now, writers. And I was like, if it wasn't on my porch, I would have faked a phone call.
Yeah.
Oh, my son just punched the teacher in the face. I got to go. One of those.
Hey, man, it happens every generation, and the young kids coming up are just fantastic. They do things that I don't do, and they do them very, very well, and I get all that. But my records that I gravitate to, my favorite records are the ones that I'm talking about. I'll go back and listen to old Seger or Marvin Gaye or Aretha Franklin or old George Jones when they came in and they sang it. And it was a live performance. And the blemishes to me on a record are what make them special.
Do you remember any really cool, like old records that you had in your collection that had mistakes that they left in?
Oh, absolutely. There was a Buck Owens thing. I think it may be Act Naturally. I'm not sure about that, but one of the big Buck Owens hits. I'm guessing here, but I'm sure that they, if the overall felt really good and it was a good take on the vocal, they kept it. And I remember the ending of one song, the bass was like, it was doom, 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 was supposed to be the ending, and the bass player just absolutely missed it. It was like doom, 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 doom. And that's how the song ends. It never resolves. And I just thought, that's freaking great.
As a kid, I would look through my record collection for those things because it felt like I had gotten some, behind the scenes, or like I was actually in the studio, because it was very human.
When you listen to Led Zeppelin,
yes.
the downbeats, they're never together on the
wide.
downbeat.
No.
Yeah.
And that's why it's so cool.
Yeah, it is. It's why they're
like
the
an
human element.
an eighth note away from each other.
I saw this video.
Some of that
this
stuff.
guy Rick Beata, who has this YouTube music channel, where he said, he's like, let me demonstrate what John Bonham would sound like on the grid. So he chopped it up and he quantized it. It was terrible.
Oh yeah, it's terrible.
Yeah, it's terrible.
Yeah.
That's true. I've said this before in interviews, but I had a James Taylor record where there was a whistle in his nose during this intimate intro that I just loved, and there was something about that where it put you in the room, put you in the zip code. It's like
Absolutely.
Whereas
man.
now there's nothing that gets by.
All the guitar squeaks, everything gets taken out, and it becomes very.
Why would you keep it?
Sterile sounding.
You can't keep it.
Yeah.
I was just listening to a Stern interview on.
But the thing about back then is you had to keep it, or you had to recut everything. You know what I'm saying? Now everything's so isolated.
You guys have more experience in the console days, and I kind of got into this a little bit later. But with breaths, we go through and de-breath everything now. And as you compress it more, the breaths. Would you guys duck the breaths, or would you just that's part of the performance?
It depends. You would do that if someone was a heavy breather. You weren't compressing to the levels that we're compressing today, that it would suck it up. So very rarely, and it kind of lived down in the lower range where tape hiss was. It wasn't a thing until we made it a thing. Because we're compressing it with 10 dB going into Pro Tools, and then we're hitting it with 20 dB whenever we're mixing it. So you're bringing up everything 30 dB.
I remember mixing stuff, though, where if there was a few bad ones, you would mark the spots, and you might
get a person that was like,
yeah, exactly.
And
you would try to duck those, but yeah, the compression level of everything that's coming out of Nashville today is just through the roof, unbelievable. It's so harsh, I did a thing recently on Mo Pitney, a record on Mo Pitney, and one of the before we were done, before we went to mastering, Curb called me and said, "Hey, we got a chance to get this song in a Netflix series in the Ranch. We got to have it mastered like tomorrow. Can you do it?" And so I don't want to name any names, but I went to the go-to guys who master everything that's coming out of Nashville now, and they mastered it real quick, and I got it back, and it was just so hot and so mid-rangey and actually distorted. I mean, like when I put the headphones on, the vocal sounded distorted. And I couldn't live with it. And so I did some research, and I actually reached out to a guy named Ted Jensen, who runs Sterling Sound. Do you know Ted?
Of course.
I've still never met him, but I just told him the issue that I had, and he said, "Man, I think I can fix you up." And I sent it to him, and it's the most musical mastering I've ever heard, and I can't imagine using anybody else. And this guy's been around a long time.
Well, he's in Nashville now.
He's in Nashville, yeah.
Sterling has an office here in Nashville.
Yes, and but I guess my point in all that is I don't know why everybody thinks now the mindset is hotter the better. So a song starts out pegging everything, and it's got nowhere to go. You get to the bridge and you need to go somewhere. You can't.
That's super interesting. We're trying to get John Elefante on the program, right? So I've got Steve Marcantonio back channeling, and I'm talking to texting. But I was watching this video where they were comparing original Kansas singer. What's his name? Is it Steve Walsh? Steve Walsh?
Yeah.
Steve Walsh and John Elefante. They were cutting between. And it was like when they cut to the Steve Walsh stuff, it was from the old school recordings. And there was this, I was telling Mike, there was this like sustain and warmth and nothing in the part of the record.
Yeah.
And a lot of the stuff with John Elefante, it's awesome. But it was in the 80s. It was in the 90s, I'd say. I think it is. Late 80s, 90s. And it's still incredible. But when you compare the sonic recordings of those two eras cut back to back like that, it was just like this warm, pillowy, soft, but it was bright as it needed to be, but it just had this calmness to it versus an energy that was like, it was like a cat coming at you.
Yeah, that's a good analogy.
It's a philosophy.
You know what's weird though? kids are so used to hearing that. They're so used to hearing MP3s or whatever, and that level of, and they like it better because that's what their ear is accustomed to.
I think there's a lot of that is learned.
I mean, they've actually done surveys, and it's like you would have never thought you listen to WAV files that have been run through tape machines and warmed up and whatever, and then you give them just what they get, and it's like, no, I like that. And it's like, oh, okay, that's where we are.
Well, it's like we were talking to Jeff Giuliano, and he was saying his big problem now is that he's a big mix engineer doing a lot of new stuff in Nashville. He's really super talented. And he doesn't do that. He doesn't squash it out. But he was saying that the rough mixes that he gets from the songwriters and producers is so hot that he has to compete against those. Not like
right.
We're now to the point with like streaming where you can bring some levels down now. You don't have to shave off the top. So people are doing that. But when the mix engineers do that and send it back to the songwriter and the producer or the the guys who did this little work tape on their laptops and then clipped it, made it look like, sausages. Yeah. They're saying, well, we hate everything about this rough mix, but it feels like more energy. It feels more like more energy because it's 12 decibels louder.
Yes.
So it's a real battle over the ears of the world. It's like, what are we going to put into a sound signature? And it goes a lot back to the songwriting as well as the way this thing's felt. It's a whole package of sonics and lyrics. Yeah. And
I like records, though. This will be my last comment on the mixing mastering thing, but I like records. I don't mind leaning in a little bit in a soft spot, and then it rising up to another level in a big spot. That moves me.
Yeah.
And everything.
It used to be you had to pay attention to records.
Yeah.
I had a mastering engineer in New York, Andy Vendette, told me, I said, hey, I think the vocals might be too low. And he said, well, my test is if you give it to a 16-year-old with a set of headphones, if they can hear the lyrics after listening through 3 times, then they're fine. It's people think that it's like it's so subjective in regards to whatever genre or whatever.
Sometimes I'm amazed when I go and I reference other mixes of how low the vocal is and like how they can get it, and I still understand every word. And having listened to it outside of my monitors at home. Mm-hmm. I never would have thought the vocal was low.
A lot of that is the musicianship around the space created around the vocal.
That's the vibe, right? Yeah. It's like, you're giving a vibe, and like you want to feature the vibe of a lot of these tracks,
Tell me what it's like to be out on the road playing with Bob Seger. Like those songs, when they come onto the radio, it's like instantly you turn the radio up, and they were just like, his voice is like, forget about it. And then the epic songs that you must be playing nightly. What's that like? Because that's your music. You grew up on it.
Yeah, pretty unreal, man. I look around because I'm mostly playing electric guitar with him, and I look around and there's 10,000 guitar players that deserve that gig before me. I play piano on a few things, but I don't know how or why that happened. My phone rang one night in 2006, about 10 o'clock at night, and I answered, and he said, is this Moose? And I said, yeah. He said, this is Bob Seger. Was totally not expecting the call.
So cool.
And I was like, I didn't believe it, and I looked down, and it said Michigan. And I said, yeah, well, hi, and he goes, hey, man, I've been cutting. He's been cutting in Nashville for years. He loves the session musicians here, and he had just cut a record called Face the Promise, and he was thinking about doing his first tour that he'd done in 10 years. Historically, he doesn't tour very often. He did a tour in '86 and then took 10 years off, and did a tour in '96, took 10 years off, and then 2006 is when I got this call. And
he does like arenas when he comes back.
Yeah,
right?
when he comes back, so and it's just arenas.
Yeah.
And I hadn't played live with anybody in like 12 years. I'd gotten off the road in the mid-'90s to kind of play on records and stuff, and so he flew me up to Detroit, and we rehearsed a little bit, and it was just surreal, man. He is the most truest rock star that I've ever been around, but yet he's the most unassuming, humble, down-to-earth guy. I mean, when I showed up, they sent a limo to the airport to take me out to his cabin to rehearse, and we rehearsed upstairs. It was above a garage, and I saw this older guy carrying a bass amp up the stairs, and I looked, and I went, that's Seger. The bass player's back was bothering him, so he was carrying the bass player's bass amp up the stairs. Yeah, he's a band leader.
So when you go out to audition or whatever you want to call it, rehearse, does he give you a set of songs to learn? Is it hilarious? Is it like Night Moves? Is it like...
Yeah, he sent a few things, but he just said, man, don't worry about it. We'll kind of work on stuff. He doesn't, he rehearses, it's a band, you know, and that's what I love about it. It's like the Silver Bullet Band, they're not session guys.
Yeah.
And if they don't feel it, they can't really play it. Where session guys are so in tune with so many different styles of music that you can throw a swing thing at them and they'll fake their way through it, or a rock thing, or a country thing, or whatever. But these guys strictly play by feel. And so when they told me I had the gig and we started rehearsing, we would rehearse 7 or 8 hours a day, and we might only rehearse 2 songs for 7 or 8 hours.
Wow. It's old school. Like
When
I was a kid in
old
bands.
school, yeah. But what I didn't even realize at the time, I needed to do that, because now we work so quick and we just gravitate to the first thing that works, but that's not always the best thing, you know. They get in depth with the song and the inner rhythms, and Seger, when he writes songs, he writes every part. He knows what he wants the bass to do, and the drums and the keys, and he hears all this stuff, you know. So he'll stop in the middle of it and he'll like, hey, you know, when you're strumming down there, can you strum up? Makes a bit. And I'm thinking, yeah, I guess, but big deal. But then after I do it, it's like, he's actually right, man. It's ringing differently, you know. I hear. So it was a really it was a great thing for me. It made me fall in love with music again.
Oh wow,
it really did.
And I've seen you on those tours it seems like for years now. So he's touring more regularly.
Well, you know what? We just did his farewell tour, and it ended in November of last year. And so I don't know if he's going to do anything else or not.
My wife, so we spent $120 to send her to the Rolling Stones final tour in like 1998.
I know, man.
And they've been around.
And they were the largest grossing tour last year.
Yeah. So
That's true.
I'm not convinced. I mean, what a singer that dude is, man.
Songwriter. Oh,
Yeah, songwriting. You forget about the catalog of songs. Just amazing, you know.
endless.
Going back to country music, I miss the opportunity to get the Bob Segers that would have come up, right? The Bruce Springsteens, the one in a millions that are just like a gift. And like now it feels like, okay, it's like the Collision of Rock and Commerce, the Mansion on the Hill book, where they're talking about how they want repeatable things. It's like Florida Georgia Line feels like a little bit of Sam Hunt and a little bit this guy, and this guy comes on, and it's like you listen to your radio, you may not be able to tell that the song has changed. You know, whereas, you know, when Springsteen came on and then Van Morrison was on after him, and all these artists, Joni Mitchell would come on. Or
I'd like to know who the they is, because I'm not sure that they out there feel that way. I think it's more a record label thing that they're scared. They want to at least guarantee get their money back.
I get it.
As opposed to having the next big
repeatable is
thing.
easier than like one in a million. James Taylor flying out.
It's going to work.
Carole
We
King
feel certain it's going to work. It may not be huge.
But my soul misses those couple of artists that you get every couple of years.
I think they do. I think the people out there do too. And I'll tell you, like I co-produced the Jamie Johnson stuff, the In Color thing you were talking about. That was the only top 10 single that we had off that record, but that record has sold 2 million records.
Right.
There's an audience for people, because it was really different at the time. It really went against the grain. It was very raw, and it wasn't a bunch of session players. It was his band for the most part. And we got in the studio late at night every night. We cut that record and the next record, the double album, in a month's time. Mixed and
which is unheard of now.
Yeah, it's unheard of, you know. But we were just there was no record label involved. It was just a bunch of guys, and we were just cutting stuff that, you know, moved us, you know. And I enjoyed that process so much that in the future I'd almost like to cut records that way if there's a label involved. I'm not sure if I want to do it, you know, because everything's by committee. And
that whole plain pizza gag where 10 people go out to get a pizza. What kind of pizza do you get? You get a plain pizza because this person can't have pepperoni. This person can't have, you know, Hawaiian pizza.
Yeah.
Yeah, there is a specialness to that. You know, there's records that you do that sometimes get around. Like Mike did the Laura Bell Bundy, her first single that was just like, came out of left field. Mm-hmm. Like when I heard it, I was like, I don't understand this. This is like not like anything else on the radio. And I was like, I loved it for that. And, you know, I don't know, was that because maybe they weren't, it seems like they were paying attention with her, but like, was there not a bunch of label control?
She had charmed the crap out of
Well, I know
them, and I think she came in with such a vision that she was such a bulldog with the vision that I think that they just said, okay, I think she knows. You know,
That's great. We need more of that. And
Yeah.
from label to label, there are still some people who get that. You know, when we cut Jamie's project, and I don't know if you've heard that record, but we put a lot of steel guitar interlude between the songs, and we tied them together, and that was all Jamie's concept. But when we went to, I don't want to name any names, we went to one label, and the guy said, "Oh, I love this. Love it. Get all that steel guitar off of there and get you writing with some of our writers, and it's going to be great.
Replace all the songs, get them remixed."
And Jamie said, "The record's done, man." You know, he said, "You can't do that. Nobody's doing that." And then we went to Luke Lewis, and he sat back and he goes, "I don't know what you guys are doing, but don't mess with that sound."
There you go.
And Jamie said, "Well, that's funny. I came here to tell you that." And so he said, "Well, let's do this deal." And
that's cool.
Well, and for only having that massive hit on there, 2 million records is super strong. There's records that have multiple number ones that can't sell 60,000 copies.
right, yeah.
So
It's a testament to the they out there. There's a market that they're not tapping into with what's going on now.
My phone keeps ringing. I'm sorry, guys. I'm
That's
gonna
all right. I wish
shut it off.
might have to get your phone. Mine never rings anymore.
And here it is. I never shut my phone off. It's like Siri's coming up. I think you have to hold these two down. But you just reminded me. One of my greatest joys is to go on my Facebook timeline and watch you in sessions with your iPhone. And evidently you finish your punches first because you then walk around the room while other people were overdubbing. And they've got things in their headphones and they're getting final punches and playing things, so they're not hearing him. And he's doing this whole commentary, and then as soon as they can hear him, it's a totally different dialogue. It's one of the funniest and the wittiest repertoire I've heard.
Well, I
the
think
past
musicians love it, and everybody else I'm not so sure about. But
it is funny, dude. You're a naturally funny dude. I thought to myself, that's a guy that's fun on the bus.
I'd like to think so.
You never
we had some
know.
pretty good times. Yep.
And so you're not doing those as much anymore. I mean, you haven't been doing a bunch of live sessions.
I haven't,
since
you know,
COVID.
and I've got this alter ego named Gilbert Donovan. I don't know if you're familiar with him or not. Okay, so I don't even think it's that funny, but there's a record producer here in town named Buddy Cannon who produces a lot of big records. And sometimes I think that's the only reason he hires me is so he can get video of Gilbert Donovan singing out of tune. And believe it or not, I probably shouldn't even say this, but I'm in the talking stages of doing a mockumentary with Gilbert Donovan with a company here in town. They approached
amazing.
me.
So what's the philosophy? Is it like I have to step off kind of thing?
Well,
Which takes a ton of talent to be able to do against a track, I'm sure.
you know what? I'm going to give my secret away. Now you'll be able to do this. It's all about the scooping. And when you scoop a note, you start flat and you go sharp. That's my secret. So, da, there's a note, da, da, ha. That's my secret. That right there is why I can't get a record deal.
Is it going to be just a documentary? Or are you going to release a record with the documentary?
You know what? He's been on the verge of a record deal since '82, so I think at this point everybody would be disappointed if he signed a record deal. It's probably just he's going to go straight to movie deal.
Yeah. I always, when you watch Spinal Tap, and I don't remember if I saw Spinal Tap when it was really released or just in my 20s, let's say, and I'm 50, so you do the math. But did they release Smell the Glove like as an actual release with that movie, I wonder, and put it out as if it were a record?
I don't know. That's a good question. I don't remember that.
Would have been genius.
Yeah.
I mean, when you
I
think
know
of
they
it.
did their follow-up movie, Break Like the Wind.
Yeah.
They had a soundtrack to that because it won a Grammy for the soundtrack. And, what's the guy? I'm terrible with names. He's an actor, and he was in...
Lenny and Squiggy did?
No, he's got really thick eyebrows, and he just did Schitt's Creek, the series.
yeah.
You know who I'm talking about.
Yes.
I can't think of his name. He's a brilliant comedian.
I can't even place
And he
his
was
face.
in...
He's in like Best in Show.
Yes, he was in Best in Show. What is the guy's name?
Oh, yeah.
I happened to be at the Grammys that year, and he was backstage, and I was the only one who was like by him, and he goes, I can't believe this, man. I just won a Grammy. I'm not a songwriter. This is crazy. This is insane. Yeah, so I knew they got a Grammy for that.
What was that
soundtrack.
guy's name?
I can't think of his
killing me
name
right now.
Yeah. Can you look on your phone, Eli, and see? It's like a Mighty Wind. He does them all.
That's what it was. Mighty Wind.
It's
That's
funny. It was
yeah,
about
that's
putting
what
on a
it was.
folk concert.
Yes. Yes. It's going to drive me crazy. I can't think of
We'll
his name.
find it.
I'll look it up here.
It's all those movies are great, and like if they put them out, I'll watch them. But Spinal Tap was one of those movies that I love it when you're in a session and somebody will make a Spinal Tap crack that's deep, deep, and they don't set it up.
Eugene Levy. That
Oh
was
no, I
him.
thought you were talking about.
No, Eugene
I know who you're
Levy.
talking about. Yeah.
No, I just happened to be backstage.
That's
and
amazing.
He's like had to
hysterical.
latch onto somebody because he was so amazed that he just won a Grammy. But
There's something to that like level of like if you make a really deep reference to Spinal Tap and you don't acknowledge it like a tip of the hat, it's even cooler. It's funner because you know the people are truly then they're super cool if they're that deep into it. There's like the outtakes in that movie that's like all the cold sores that they have on. What you don't see is that there's a girl that has a cold sore. They took that out, and then like the rest of the scenes, there's this unexplained cold sore that ends up on everyone's lip.
yeah, it's man, those guys are so brilliant, and I find that most session players are incredible wits too.
Yeah.
Very sharp mind and very dry. Most of them are very, but that much talent in a room, and they're all comedians, and you just spend all day laughing.
So you playing mostly guitar or keyboards on sessions?
And on sessions, keyboards. Yeah.
Okay, and so why guitar with Seger?
Man, he wanted a utility player, and when I got the call, he said probably going to be playing mostly keys, maybe a little bit. You play guitar? And I said, yeah, maybe a little guitar, sing a little, whatever. And so when I got there, it was the first tour that he'd done in 10 years, and so he couldn't really play guitar like he wanted. And so he goes, hey, Moose, you just play guitar on this one, let me show you what I played. And he just kept passing them off. So we do like 25 songs a night, and 20 of them I was playing electric guitar because he played guitar on a lot of those records, and he knew the parts. He just couldn't do it, anymore. He let a few years go by without playing guitar.
Yeah.
And it's tough to stay on top of.
Yeah. Now, are you doing a bunch of guitar work and session work too, or?
On my productions, I do, and usually it's because I can play more ignorant than a lot of session guys. You know what I mean?
Grease it up a little.
Yeah,
It's more like a
grease
band
it up.
thing. Yeah.
It's hard to get guys who because 99% of the time they're called to be very pristine and exact in their parts, and sometimes you just want a knucklehead playing Keith Richards,
totally.
and so I usually will
Good
do
example.
that.
Those two guitars on the Stones, when you hear one on left and one on the right, it's like they couldn't be more
Brilliant.
different. It's
the best rhythm guitar player maybe ever lived to me is Keith Richards.
So, like, let's say you're done with a show and it's 11:30 at night, right? You just played some hockey rink. What do you guys do after that? Do you all have, or you're not all cramming onto one buzz?
No, this is where you're going to feel sorry for me. This is the part where I'm going to give
G5 is included in this.
So the band had a private jet, and Seger had his own private jet.
Wow.
And we would never work 2 nights in a row. So the typical week would be, say, Monday night we play Chicago. We would spend the night. Seger would be taken to his jet immediately after the show, and he'd fly home. He'd be home a lot of times before we get to the hotel. He'd have a day off at the house. We'd have the next day we would fly to the next city and have a night off. Say it's St. Louis. Have a night off in St. Louis. And the next night we would play the show. Seger would fly in for sound check, do the show. Seger would fly home. We spend the night, fly to the next city, have a night off.
What do you do on your night offs?
Man, that was the tough part of that gig, because if I had my way, we'd be working every night, But there were 2 or 3 times in the years that I was with him that we did 2 shows in a row, 2 nights in a row, and he lost his voice every time because he screams, So that was the tough part of the gig, was trying to stay busy. I saw a lot of movies. I walked a lot. I found books to read. I got into Netflix and whatever. So just trying to not lose my mind out on the road was the toughest part of that gig.
And those, of course, all those shows are sold out, every single one of them, right? So it's like you go from city, guaranteed that you're going from city to city. Are you like, do they have buses at the venue? Like, how are you getting from the private jet? Are you car services, Uber?
Like, like not buses, but like
Sprinter van type thing?
Yeah, like a Sprinter van.
So you're hanging out in the green room is what you have. You don't have a bus there per se to be hanging on.
Yeah, so a lot of times we had the choice. So sound check would be like at 4 o'clock, so we wouldn't have anything to do till maybe 3 or whatever. And then we'd have a Sprinter van run the band over, a couple Sprinter vans run the band, and everybody over to the gig. We'd do sound check. They'd have catered dinner. And then usually we'd have a couple hours before we had to be back. So a lot of guys would go back to the hotel and spend a couple hours, whatever, and then come back for the gig. It was very relaxed.
How big is that band?
Let's see. We had this last tour. We had Greg Morrow, a Nashville guy on drums, Rob McNally on electric, me on electric and keys, bass, Chris Campbell, who's been with Seger since 1969, Alto Reed on saxophone, who's been with him since '72.
On soprano sax or alto sax?
Tenor, actually, most of the time. 4-piece horn section from Detroit. So what is that, 10? And then we had another guitarist who's been with Seger for a long time who would come out and play on a few songs. His name was Mark Chatfield. And then we had a keyboard tech who would play if the song needed 2 keyboard parts, but my guitar part was important. He would come out on stage. So I think, and 3 background singers. So I think at times there were 14 people on stage.
And is it a great hang? Is there
great
stress
hang.
and energy? I mean, it seems like it'd be a really good gig, and if you had the right crew, it could be like summer camp.
Yeah. When I first got the gig, I was the only guy from Nashville. And then in 2013, Seger wanted to make a change with the guitar player, and so he brought Kenny Greenberg out from Nashville. And that went really well, but that fall, Kenny went out with Kenny Chesney. That's always kind of been his main gig. And so that's when we brought Rob McNally
Kenny
in.
who?
Kenny Greenberg.
No,
yeah.
who did he go out with?
Oh, Kenny Chesney.
The country artist?
Yeah, he's up and coming.
Little guy.
Yeah, I think he's maybe on Broken Bow or something. But so when Rob got there, it was like, Seger was like, he didn't even have to say it. I could just tell he was like, finally, this is what I've been wanting to hear. And then Donnie Brewer from Grand Funk Railroad had always been the drummer while I was there. And Donnie had some Grand Funk dates that conflicted. And so that's when I said, well, let's get Greg Morrow. Actually, about 3 years ago, I was doing the ACM Honors Award show on TV, and Greg was playing drums, and I was playing. And during the show, Seger's wife started texting me, and she goes, Bob said you guys are killing it, And then she said, Bob wants to know who the drummer is. And I said, well, that's Greg Morrow. And then he booked a session like the next week, and Greg came in and played drums. He just loved what he heard. And that was the final piece. It's weird to think he's had this whole career, and I honestly can tell this last tour, we did 70-something shows. He's never done that many shows.
Wow.
And he was just like, musically, he's like a kid. He was having so much fun. And that's what Greg and Rob brought to that band,
Nash, it's so funny. You were saying like, oh, it's a Silver Bullet band, and then like you start mentioning the people, and I'm like, that's Nashville guy. That's like, they're slowly taking over the Silver Bullet band.
They have, and I was talking to Seger. Seger's recorded in Nashville since the '90s, and he just loves the way the Nashville session guys interact, and I think he likes. There's a common thread I think with Nashville session players is that, like you said, everybody kind of checks their ego at the door, and it's not about us. It's about this artist that we're working for and trying to become their band for 3 hours. And I think Seger really digs that. And I asked him one time when I first got the gig, I said, man, what was it like recording with the Silver Bullet Band back in the 70s? He goes, honestly, hell. I said, really? Because those are my favorite records.
Oh, yeah.
Because you can feel the tension on the records. You can feel that tension. And he just said, man, I can get out of you guys in 3 hours what I had trouble getting out of them in a week.
Yeah, I get it. But when you listen to that,
That's what I love about the record.
The hi-hat on that song, that would not be a Nashville player.
He would not be a Nashville player. And I'm so glad that he didn't know about it. First, he went to Muscle Shoals, and those are undeniably great records, too.
Hollywood Nights is the song I was trying to...
Hollywood Nights was the Silver Bullet Band.
That hi-hat in that song is a great example of what you would never get out of a Nashville
Actually, two
session.
drummers on that track.
At the same time?
Yes. He tracked with two drummers because there's a lot going on.
I've never understood that.
Yeah, it's wild.
It always bothered me seeing like the Doobie Brothers or whoever, and I'm like, well, which snare are we hearing him? It's like, I get it if one guy's just like doesn't have a kick and snare.
It worked in that record though, didn't it? They did it in such a way. I don't know that everybody. I don't know that both of them were playing the snare.
Time.
Yeah, they did. They did track at the same time.
That's wild.
But maybe one of them wasn't playing the snare.
Imagine being a Pro Tools engineer back then,
Oh,
pocketing a record like that. It's like, then they had a whole percussion kit, I'm sure. Well, dude, tell me a little bit about, you're a monster songwriter. Okay, by the way, I mean, I'm just being selfish with the Seger thing because I'm like geeking out on the Seger thing, right? Because I was a kid and I loved Seger.
Me too, man.
So you got to do that. Amazing. But, like, you're a monster songwriter. I mean, the hits you've had are like, these are substantial hits. There's regular hits and then there's substantial hits, and you don't know what a substantial hit is. You know whenever you have a regular hit, though.
Did you know with It's 5 O'Clock Somewhere that you had a...
I didn't know only because I thought before that I had written something like that, and that was the first song that I ever wrote that saw the light of day. That was the first song that was the first ever released song that I had ever written, and I kind of backed into the whole songwriting thing. I was playing on a lot of songwriter demos, and your listeners, I'm not sure who your listeners are, but that was a whole thing.
Oh, we don't have any listeners.
Well, someday if you get some, maybe they'll understand. But in the early 2000s, there was a couple thousand songwriters who had publishing deals,
right?
And whenever they would get 5 songs that they wanted to pitch, they would book session players to go in and make these things sound like records so they could pitch them. And so the bulk of a session player's career, most of us, were playing on demos. And then in the wintertime, the artist would come off the road, and we might do most of the winter playing records. But through the year, it was all demos. And I forgot where I was going with this. What was
you were saying to get 5 songs together and then you go in and cut?
Oh, yeah. So I had met all these songwriters and worked on all the big songwriters' demos. And I had a few of them say, man, I love writing with a piano player. Would you write with me? And I'd never really given much thought to songwriting. I didn't come to Nashville to be a songwriter. Tommy Polk and Melba Montgomery, in particular, kept after me, like, man, please write with us. We'd love to get some melodies, So I started writing with them, and like probably the 3rd or 4th song that I wrote, Martina McBride cut for her greatest hits. And I got signed to a publishing deal the same month to Seagale Music, which was Frank Rogers, Chris Dubois, and Brad Paisley owned this company. This was in 2000. So I thought, I don't know what all the hubbub's about. The songwriting is a piece of cake. Everybody says it's so hard. Well, my song ended up, they didn't make the record. And then the next 5 songs that I had cut didn't make the record, or the artist lost their record deal before or just whatever. And I'm thinking, this sucks, man. I literally had 5 songs cut, and none of them saw the light of day. And so I had written this thing with Don Rollins called It's 5 O'Clock Somewhere, and we got Chris Stapleton to sing on the demo. He used to sing on all my. He wrote at Seagale as well. We were big buddies, and so when I turned it into Seagale was. I was in a co-venture. Seagale was actually under the umbrella of EMI Publishing. And the head of EMI was Gary Overton, and at one time he managed Alan Jackson. So he had an inside track. He knew that Alan wanted to cut a duet with Buffett. And so when I turned that demo in, Gary heard it, and he called me, and he said, man, I just heard that thing you just turned in, and Alan's going to cut that. And I said, okay. He said, no, seriously, I'm going to have dinner with him this Saturday. I'm going to tell him he needs to cut this. He'll listen to me. And sure enough, he did. And so that song is the only song that I've ever written. I mean, we wrote it, I want to say it was February 10th or something in 2003. I demoed it March 14th. Alan heard it and recorded it in April, and in May it was on the radio. And at the end of May, it was number 1. It never happens like that. All the stars aligned.
And how long was it number 1 for?
Well, I don't like to talk about it all that much. 8 weeks. It was number 1 for 7 weeks.
Incredible.
And then Dierks Bentley pushed it out of number 1 with his first single, What Was I Thinking? And then the next week we pushed him out of number one, and we went back to number one.
Nice.
So yeah, it was incredible. I mean, it was incredible, you know.
And for anyone who doesn't know, like a 1 week number one's a big deal. 2 week is like, okay, that's a big deal. 3 week is like, okay, there's really something there. Anything above that, people are looking to sue you to get the money. Like, hey, does that remind me of my Alan Parsons project? So you almost don't want to get, like, when you get around 4 or 5 weeks on the charts, it's like you're in a dangerous territory because people are looking for similarities because they know there's a big pile of money connected to that song. 8 weeks is like, you know, they could just go home at radio for, it's like, you know, the Christmas break where they just they freeze the charts at that point.
It was a blessing, man, and it I think it went to like 16 or 17 on the pop charts. It just was a phenomenon, and Buffett brought all that on. And, you know, he's a phenomenon in himself, and that was the first recognition he'd really gotten industry-wise in his whole career. He was able to build this empire with no awards, no number ones, no nothing.
Right.
That was his first number one, first award. It won some CMA award for vocal event or something, you know.
And what did you how does that song start, like when you're in the writing room?
My co-writer had the idea, and Don, he lives outside of Houston now. And he grew up there, and he used to teach band. He's a saxophone player and a great songwriter, great lyricist. But he had this guy that he worked with at school that used to say that, come on, let's get us 3:30, let's go get us a beer, you know. And Dom said, it's a little early for me. Oh, it's 5 o'clock somewhere, you know. We've all heard that. I heard that my whole life. So much so that I almost didn't want to write it because Don said, man, I think we ought to write it's 5 o'clock somewhere. And I thought, man, surely that's been written. I've heard that saying forever. And I started thinking, and I couldn't. This was back when I was still writing in a notebook, so I didn't Google or anything. But I couldn't think of anything. So we wrote it like really quickly, like in an hour and a half. It was done, and went to lunch and had no idea what was about to happen. But yeah, we actually wrote that with an artist in mind. I ran into. Oh, shoot, I usually don't say the name, but I'll say the name, Blake Chansey. Blake was a record producer who produced Montgomery Gentry and other people. And he said, man, I'm working with this artist. I can't even remember the artist's name now, but he said, we're looking for a fun summertime single. You know, if you got something, we'll cut it, you know. And like the next day is when I had that writing appointment. So I couldn't wait to take that to Blake. And I actually sat in the room, sat down with him, played it, and he shut it off before it got to the hook. And he goes, nah, I don't hear it. I said, really? He goes, nah, I don't hear it.
Wow.
I said, oh, okay. So I was in Buddy Cannon's office, and Buddy jokes about this, but Buddy is a tough song person. I mean, he's a great song person, but when he loves something, he loves it, and when he doesn't like it, he's the first to let you know. And so I did the same thing with him, and he listened all the way through, and he went, nah, because that was when Chesney was cutting all that beachy stuff, you know. He went, nah, I don't. I said, really? And he said, nah, don't hear it. And so I thought, wow, I thought we kind of hooked one, but maybe we didn't, you know. And then it took Gary Overton to get it directly to Alan. But I saw an interview kind of recently that Kenny Chesney was doing the Bobby Bones show, and Bobby asked him about that I had always heard that you passed on the song, and Kenny said, do you honestly think I would have passed on It's 5 o'clock somewhere if that had been pitched to me? So he had no idea it was pitched to him.
Yeah, that's a Kenny Chesney song.
Yeah.
It's written all over it.
But you know what? The week that it went number one, Buddy Cannon is a great friend, and he called me, and he goes, hey, man, I just wanted to tell you, I remember you pitching me that song, and it ended up where it was supposed to be. You know, that's the best thing that could have ever happened, me passing on the song.
I thought you were going to say, he said, I got it wrong.
No, he would never say that. Oh, he's tough, man. You know, I remember the first record I played on that I thought he was going to produce. I'd never worked with him, and I always wanted to. And it was for the song Redneck Yacht Club. So I got called. Phil O'Donnell was going to be co-producing with Buddy Cannon that song. And I already had a record booked that day, but I bailed on it because I wanted to work with Buddy Cannon. And when I got there, Buddy was not there. And he said, I'm not cutting that song. If that's the song we're cutting, I'm out. That's a piece of crap, and I ain't cutting it. and so that's how he has his strong beliefs, and that's great, you know. But
well, you know, it's funny because people look back on the 70s like it was his dream era of just magic songs, but there was still Leif Garrett putting records out, and Sean Cassidy,
Yeah.
and
Well, Craig
Captain
Morgan
and Tennille putting out records that were cheese. So there, I guess every, and not that these songs that we're referring to, but they're maybe on the lighter side, or maybe they're like, I think like as a songwriter, I want to write some gimmick songs, and then I want to write up tempo for 70%, and then 20%, maybe some mid tempos or whatever. A good diet of songs. It is, and it's like you need to metabolize everything, or if you're just stuck doing the same thing, you're not going to have any.
Craig Morgan had the luxury of playing that. He had been playing it out live, and he saw the reaction it was getting. And Buddy didn't have that luxury. He just heard the song, the demo, and he went, "This is not good. I'm not cutting this." The crowds were loving it, and so Craig said, "Man, I've been doing it live," and Buddy said, "Well, I'm out." And so we cut it. The song went to #1, and again, Buddy. The story I heard was Buddy called Benny Bowling over at Broken Bow and said, "Hey, I'm just calling to eat a little crow.
Yeah.
Congratulations, that's a big old hit." I'm still glad I didn't produce that piece of crap, but congratulations to you guys.
Tell me what you know about this. I heard that the songwriters, whenever you write a song, you copyright the song, but you don't own the title. So I heard that they trademarked that title, the songwriters, the Redneck Yacht Club.
Yeah.
And that so whenever they made T-shirts and anytime they exploited it, they had to pay the songwriters a trademark fee for that. Do you know anything about that story?
I do know about that, and I think it's called a service mark, and basically it's very specific. You have to purchase a service mark for sales and hats. You have to, if you want it on T-shirts, you got to purchase that. And those guys were very smart to do that. We weren't able to do that with 5 O'Clock Somewhere because it was too common of a phrase. Right. But Redneck Yacht Club is very. So
I wonder, did those guys end up like after the tour was done, were they like, "Hey, by the way," or did they do it beforehand?
I don't know that. I don't know that they even did it for that reason. I think that they traveled around and did songwriter shows and was able to sell that stuff, and so they could probably put the kibosh on anybody else. I don't know if it would be smart to go to an artist. And
How would you? Yeah,
I don't. My son Jeremy called me one day, and he had seen a T-shirt for sale online that said it's 5 O'Clock Somewhere, but it had the lyrics to the chorus on the shirt, and it was Buffett stuff. And he goes, "You need to sue him." And I'm thinking, buddy, I just need to be thankful for what I have. First of all, I'm not gonna sue a half billionaire. There's no way you're gonna win that fight. Yeah. And that's not how I want to spend my time. I mean, you'll go to an early grave worrying a lawsuit. Nobody wins except the lawyers.
Right.
And I'd rather be grateful for what it's done for me than trying to take it from everybody else.
In that song, I can only imagine. I know what a #1 makes, but I can only imagine. And there's other. Are you at BMI?
I'm at ASCAP, but it still paid pretty good.
Well, BMI, I'm sure it did. BMI has this thing where it's like if you're classified as an evergreen copyright, you get that hit song bonus money where it's not just spins. You're categorized as something else. I don't know. Do they do that at ASCAP?
I can't really talk about this too much because I've signed something saying I wouldn't, but it's been a fight to get them to honor that, and they have, and that's about all I can say about it. But yeah, BMI does have it. They call it a standards bonus. I don't know what makes a song a standard, but there's actually a column in their payment stuff that says that. And ASCAP does not do that. But in all fairness, ASCAP over the last few years, it's cyclical, and there's been periods in Nashville's history where ASCAP has outpaid BMI, and it comes and goes. But sometimes you have to force them to say, "Hey, this is not right. BMI, look at this over here," and blah blah blah. So they've been really good to me, but it's not been without struggle.
I can remember on the first hit I had for Jimmy Wayne. It was a 3-week #1, and the quarterly check that I got had it had this many spins, and it had the number of for the payment for those spins, and it was I want to say it was $13,000. But then the hit song bonus one was a 6-figure number.
Yeah.
And I was like, how am I supposed to ever figure out what I'm getting paid?
Well, there's no way that you can because, and I think they want it that way. I think it all started to appease the
You never trust a building without windows.
Very good, or all marble. The hit songwriters, they wanted to find a way because those guys were threatening to leave and go to the other PRO. And so they wanted to find a way to keep those guys happy. And so they came up with this way to do that. Where does that money come from? I think I know because I've had songs that died on the charts at 32 that didn't make hardly anything. I think they pull from that. I think
Right.
they pull from back catalog stuff. And in my mind, they should all pay the same, because 3 minutes of advertising dollar is 3 minutes of advertising dollar.
Right.
But there are other variables involved too. I think they try to take into consideration, like a song like 5 O'Clock Somewhere, how many times is that performed live by different bands?
Right,
All
like
this
a
money
BMI
goes-
license to a jukebox or
Exactly,
to
all
a venue
that
to have
stuff.
people play it.
It's all guesswork. There's no, the radio stuff is exact science, but all the other stuff is a lot of variables that they have. to guess.
Have you had anything that's touched that in size or scale as a songwriter? I mean, is that just like when you look at your history, like that thing is the Mount Everest on the page?
Tony Lane, who's a great songwriter in Nashville, when that song came out, he said, "Moose, I hate to tell you this, but it's all downhill from that one, buddy." and in some ways he's right, but
I've had tons of other cuts and hits.
Yeah, I've never had another number one. I've had a couple other top tens, but and they pay a big quarter and then they go away really quickly. And 5 O'Clock Somewhere still pays like it's on the charts. It's been an incredible copyright. It really has.
On a side note, I have a couple ideas for revisions of that lyric.
I think we should talk about it.
Pound them out after the thing here. Let's get that PRO information updated.
Just a small piece of the copyright, right? You're going to give
just
that
a sliver. Just a sliver.
What's funny is I'm really good friends with Dean Dillon and Jim Collins, and they had, at the same time that came out, they had written a song called "It's Midnight Somewhere," and Dean called me and said, "Well, shit, missed it by 7 hours." Their song was about a guy that took off work early to come home to spend some time with his wife, and she said, "It's too early in the day and it's midnight somewhere." It's kind of the same hook.
Same idea.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny because songwriters think like this, right? It's like the people, they look at all these songs, they think they're whatever they are. But it's like, you'll say, "Oh, that's the same song that we wrote. I've pulled this lever before, this gag." It's like, I've written the same 30 songs over and over again.
It's all been written, man.
Right.
I mean, it's either you can only drink so many beers or love so many people, I mean,
right. And that's whenever someone comes in, like, that's just like totally their soul is still on fire from just showing up in town, and they give you a title like Shine or something that you've written a million times.
Yeah.
And you're just like, wake me up whenever there's something that we can do in here. It's like you have to find a way to see it through a different lens or write it differently than you've written it the 6 other times that you've written that title.
Yeah.
So people think these songs just show up, and each one is an individual sort of creation, but they really are derivative of the way you think when you become a producing, not producer, but like quantity production of songs, getting a lot of songs written. You start to say, "Oh, this is like that other song."
Yeah.
Songwriters, you'll notice where like the three of us start writing on it, we'll start to have conversations that aren't in the room, but it's like, it's like this thing that and everybody knows 6 steps into that chess game. That's the difference between, writing with super great songwriters and guys that, you can just get a lot done in a short period of time. But I tell you what, I still love writing with people that have never written before.
I do too.
It's their first time.
I haven't been writing very much. I wrote a little bit for Mo Pitney's record, and I just finished up a record on this girl named Heidi Newfield, who used to be in a band called Trick Pony, and she's doing a first solo project.
She had a solo record that was big too, right? Right after Trick Pony.
Yeah, Tony Brown did one on her like 10, 12 years ago.
Had a big old hit on it.
Yeah, big song, Johnny and June.
Yeah, great
So this
song.
is like the first project she's done, and since then, and we had a blast, man. And I wrote a bunch with her for that. And
that's the way to do it.
Yeah, well,
Find people to create with and make great records.
that's the way it seems to work for me. The days of going into the cubicle every day, it's too tedious, and honestly, I can make more money overall per hour, doing other things. It's really tough to make a living as a songwriter unless you have a big radio smash. It's tough,
Will you play on people's records? Like, do you have a setup at your place, or how does that work?
Sometimes, most of the time, most of the records I track on, I'm at a great place in my career. I've been doing this a long time, and like I said, 2 or 3 years ago, I really thought about retiring because I wasn't enjoying it like I used to, and it's nobody's fault but my own. But I was getting called to play on a lot of records that were all the things that we talked about earlier, not overproduced, but the way they produce now, everything's real gridded and tight, and they don't want anybody, especially a piano player, to play they want a weird part that's got a delay on it that syncs up and that kind of stuff. And it's just, there's young kids coming up that do that way better than me, and I'm not really interested in doing that. I want to play. So I started having thoughts of getting out of it, and once I made that decision, my phone would ring, and I'd do a little research and say, what kind of stuff is this going to be? Oh, it's going to be that kind of stuff. And I would just call them back and say, man, I'm so sorry, I'm booked that day, which was the weirdest thing in the world, because as a musician, you pray your whole life that the phone rings so you can say yes. And the thought of saying no was so foreign. But once I got in that mindset, I'm way happier, because the things that I play on mean something to me.
Right.
So
You're
I'm
not going
working.
to work anymore.
I'm not going to work anymore, and that's the way it was in the beginning, man. Back in the early days, the songs, the level of songwriting moved me so much, and the level of 6 or 7 guys in a room playing, the second take being the record that you hear, and it's all the spontaneity and everybody on the edge of the seat, and the camaraderie and the interaction, instant interaction is so moving,
Yeah.
and it's not really recorded like that. Some producers work that way, but for the most part, man, you're adding layers and stuff, building a wall. And but man, so like this year, I got to play on an Eric Church record. He went over to the hills of North Carolina, where he's from, and there's a golf resort over there.
Did you play on Put That in Your Country Song?
I'm not sure. I played on that
Jeffrey Steele single that was on the last record.
I'm not sure of the song titles, and I didn't play on the whole record because he brought Nashville guys over on his bus with his band. He records with his band, and then there's a couple supplemental Nashville guys. I'm not sure, but I played on probably 6 or 7 of the songs of the upcoming album. I think he cut like 28 songs in 28 days. It was the weirdest thing. It was actually really cool. He would bring songwriters over. They would write during the day. The band would get together that night at like 6 p.m. and we'd cut the song that they wrote that day.
Really
and he did
cool.
28 days in a row.
That's
I don't know how he did it.
That's tiring.
Yeah, it's tiring, but he acted. I mean, he said it was like probably the same type of way I feel when I'm hearing a song for the first time and go, and you got to deliver. Yeah. He had pressure on him. He had to cut a song because he had a band there that he was paying to record it that night. So that's the way we cut that record. So I got to play on Eric's record. I played on some of Luke Combs' stuff this year.
That's cool.
We did a record on Reba. I got actually cutting a Reba record this week that Buddy Cannon's producing. I've been playing on some Kid Rock stuff, Willie Nelson, but I'm not really doing a lot of other stuff that I'm not familiar with, and some of it's because I'm not getting called. There's a lot of young talent coming up that's great, and some of it I'm just going, I'm not sure I'm the guy anymore for that kind of stuff,
Oh man, what a great time! Well, thank you so much for coming on. Great songwriter, and you could just tell the energy. You got a special kind of energy that's like, we talk about this, like, who do you want in the room when you're doing something that you really put out as your, this is my passion. It's like there's only certain people you want to let in that room because the chemistry is really important. You could tell you're one of those guys just from hanging with you real quick here.
I'd like to think so, man. I've always thought that you've always got a choice when you hire a musician. You can hire somebody who's not very nice, or you can hire a nice guy who's an easy hang. Right. And there's very talented guys.
It's even more than that, though. I mean, there's something that's like when you get together, you feel like it's a brain trust of trying to accomplish this thing that you're doing. So I can't really put it into words, but you can tell. Like, I've been knowing you online forever. And I felt like, I know this guy.
I love music,
it's so
man.
cool to get to meet you in person.
I love music. I love real music, and I love capturing and being a part of the outpouring of the soul, and that's the music that moves me. And so I hope as a genre we can get back totally that. I don't know if we ever will. There's great music being made out there. It's just you have to search for it a little bit more than what you used to.
Yep.
Yeah. But anyway, thanks for having me.
Oh, you're
Thank
awesome,
you
buddy.
very much, man.
Thank you so much. We're signing off. We'll see you next time from the West Barn.